Setting up Flexi schedule. Go to Scheduling and Attendance. Click on Clocking Schedule. Right-click to add a new clocking schedule. Enter the schedule ID and the name of the schedule according to your preference. Next, select the work schedule as Flexi. Enter the description if there's any. Click OK to proceed to the configuration of the clocking schedule. Firstly, set the day type according to the company's working day. If the company does not work on Saturday and Sunday, select the day type to be rest day or off day. You can round up, down or round to midpoint for each column according to your settings for easier calculation. You can also allow the grace period for the employees. For example, if you key in 15 minutes in the Allow Grace Period in Minutes column, anyone who clocks in 15 minutes later from the official end time, they will not be considered late in the attendance sheet. There is an option whereby you can choose to apply rounding for first in and last out for the purpose of job costing. Leave it blank if you do not wish to use this rule in your attendance data. Flexible break time feature allows the company to set a certain duration allowed for breaks. During this break duration, employees are free to take their break hour, but they have to be mindful of the preset limit set in this column. General tab. The maximum pairing of clocking time in TCMS V3 is 3. In out, break resume, OT done. Since flexi clocking is flexible as the name suggests, you can choose to use only one pairing only or a maximum of 3 pairs. If you want the employees to select the status key on the terminal to determine their clocking status, select the Enable or Disable Employee Define In or Out records. Once this is selected, the system will disregard all settings done in the Clocking Schedule tab and will follow the clocking status selected by the employees. Select Yes if you want the user to enter his or her work code to specify his or her tasks in attendance report. In Flexi Schedule, there will be a possibility where an employee reports to work late at night and the working hours are extended until the next day. To avoid the out time to fall into the in column of the next day, you must key in the hours worked to be considered as the same workday. For example, if the employee starts work at 10 p.m. and he is leaving at 6 a.m., you must enter 8 hours for the work time to be considered as the same day. Following the rule above, you need to specify the duration in between a clock out and a clock in to qualify an employee for the next day pay. For example, the employee who checked out at 6 a.m. just now must not check in again immediately and consider it the next day work time. The hours specified here will determine the duration of rest required before the same employee could clock into work and qualify for the next day work time. This setting is similar to maximum hours to be considered as the same workday, but instead of keying in the hours, you need to specify the last logout time that the company allows to consider as the same workday. For example, if you put 4 a.m. as the last logout time, the clockout after 4 a.m. will not be considered as a same-day clocking. All clocking activities within this predefined time interval will be considered only once, excepting only the first clock in. For example, if the in time is 9 a.m. and the time interval is 60 minutes, any verification done by the same ID within the 60 minutes will be considered as in time, taken the first time he clocks in. Rounding tab. Rounding tab determines the rounding of minutes rules allowed in the clocking schedule, and the rules will determine the presentation of time in the attendance sheet. You can choose to round your total work hours as well as to round your overtime hours. You can also choose to round the in time or out time according to your preference. For example, any transaction between 6 a.m. to 7 a.m. will be rounded as 6:30 a.m. or any transaction between 3 p.m. to 4 p.m. will be rounded as 3:30 p.m. Break tab. You can determine the rules for break time allowed in the clocking schedule, and the rules will determine the presentation of time in the attendance sheet. The first option is to ignore the break time. Select Yes if you want to deduct break time from the total work time. If you don't click on the checker, the time will be calculated based on the formula. The last clocking minus the first clocking equals work time. You can add the remaining lunch or dinner time into the work time. This is to add the work time for the users who work during their lunch or dinner break. If this is applicable in your company, tick the checker to turn it on. Overtime tab. You can define the number of hours considered normal working hours for Flexi schedule, for example 8 hours. If an employee exceeds that 8 hours, the next hour and after are considered as overtime. If your company has different overtime rate for different sessions of overtime. Here, you can define how many hours the employee is required to work before he/she is entitled for different overtime. You can define the minimum minutes required by the company for a staff to work before they qualify for an OT claim. You can also limit the maximum number of hours a staff can claim for overtime for each working day. By default, this is set as 24 hours. If any of your employees comes back to work on the weekend or on a holiday and you want to calculate the work hour on that day as overtime, you can select the checker for work time treat as overtime. We are now done with setting up the Flexi clocking schedule. Click on Save button to save the settings.